Welcome to our Friday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today is my end of my third week and also my last day to be teaching on lessons from Joseph. I have a brand new book out on that, a 200-plus page book. We are asking for a donation of some amount for this. But then I have a summary of this entire book that's only 50 pages. It's a little booklet. We're giving this away as a free gift. We're asking for a suggested donation on the book, and then we also have CDs, DVDs, and a USB. And let me just say that this teaching on Joseph is one of the most important things that you could ever learn. There's so many lessons to learn from him, and today's my last day to teach on this. I encourage you to please go to the effort of getting this. I've made this teaching as available as I possibly can. You can actually go to our website and you can look at all of these TV programs. They're archived there, absolutely free. But however you do it, you need to study the life of Joseph. This is just a powerful, powerful example of what a person can do through the power of God. And so this is our last day. I've just got to cut to the chase, but this is after Joseph had already sent back 9 of the brothers, left Simeon in prison, told them that they couldn't come back unless they had brought Benjamin with them. The father, Jacob, did not want to send Benjamin because that was his favorite son. It was the last son that was left of his favorite wife, Rachel. And so anyway, finally, they just ran out of food. They had to do it. So they came down. They got more grain, and Joseph actually invited them to come to his house and eat with him that day. And man, this caused even more fear in their life because they just knew that, man, God was holding them accountable for what they had done to Joseph 22 years before this. And it says that they feared exceedingly. They told the steward of Joseph's house that they had found their money back in their sacks. They didn't know how it happened. They were beginning to come clean. They were trying to make restitution. And the steward told them, "I'm the one that put the money in the sack." Boy, they didn't know what to think about this. And so let me take up the story here in Genesis chapter 43, verse 33. This is when they were in the house and they were going to eat at Joseph's house. And it says in verse 33, "And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled one at another." Why did they marvel? This is something that some people pass over and don't think about. But the point is that when Joseph brought them into his house, he seated them in the exact order of their birth. From Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, just right on down all the way to Benjamin. How did they know this? They didn't tell anybody who the oldest was. This is the reason that they marveled. They recognized, how could these people know who is the oldest, the second-born, third, fourth, fifth, all the way down to this 12th son? How did they know this? Well, of course, it was Joseph that knew this. He knew his brothers, and he set it up so that they would be seated in order according to their birth, and they marveled one at another. And he took and sent messes unto them from before him. In other words, Joseph was the one that was dishing out all of the food. And it says, but Benjamin's mess, or his amount of food, was 5 times so much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him. Again, this is Joseph preferring Benjamin over all the rest of the brothers. And then in verse 44, "And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, Fill the sacks with food." Just for time's sake, I'm going to have to summarize some of this. But basically, after they had eaten there, he sent these brothers home. And this time, he put their money back in their sacks. But this time, he also put his gold cup in the sack of Benjamin. And so he sent them out, and they started on their way home. And after they had started home, he commanded the steward of his house to go and to arrest the one who had stolen his golden cup. And so let me read part of that. In chapter 44, verse 4, it says, "And when they were gone out of the city and not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, Up, follow after the men, and when thou hast overtaken them, say unto them, Wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Is not this it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby he divineth? You have done evil in so doing. And he overtook them and spake unto them these words." In other words, again, this was all a plant. Joseph was still trying to bring them to the end of themselves. And so when this steward came to him and told them what Joseph has said, here's what the brothers said. They said unto him, Wherefore saith my Lord these words? God forbid that thy servant should do according to this thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of thy Lord's house silver or gold? With whomsoever thy servant it be found, both let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondmen. You know, these guys just continued to promise more than what they could deliver. Reuben said, you could kill my 2 sons if I don't bring Benjamin back. Judah said, you can blame me forever and put this against me. And here they are saying that if you find this golden vessel in anybody's sack, he can die and we will all be your slaves. Well, what dumb things to say. Here they were, still lying, still promising things that they couldn't deliver. And anyway, he said, this is the servant of Joseph said, Now also let it be according unto your word. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless. And so they began through the sacks, and they went from the oldest unto the youngest. And when they got to Benjamin, they found that the golden vessel was in his sack. And it says here in verse 11, And they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched and began at the eldest and left at the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes, which was a sign of extreme grief and sorrow, and laded every man his ass, and returned to the city. And so anyway, the long and the short of it was, when they finally got before Joseph, they began to start repenting. And Judah, the 4th born son of Jacob, the one who had committed incest with his own daughter-in-law, he began to be the spokesman for the group. And so in verse 14 it says, And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said unto them, What deed is this that ye have done? Won't ye not that such a man as I can certainly divine? And Judah said, What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? In other words, he had just literally come to the end of himself. There was no way out of this. This was a dead end. And for the first time, it looked like that they couldn't get by with anything. And he said, God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servant, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. Man, this is amazing. God had found out their iniquities, what he said. He began to recognize that they were reaping what they sowed, and they just had nothing to offer. For the first time, there was no way to talk their way out of this, lie out of it. And so Joseph said unto them, God forbid that I should do this, but the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get you up in peace unto your father. Then Judah came near unto him and said, O my Lord, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not thine anger burn against thy servant, for thou art even as Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servants, saying, Have ye a father or a brother? And we said unto my Lord, We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead, and he alone left of his mother, and his father loveth him. And then he goes on to say, Now therefore when I come to thy servant, my father, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life, it shall come to pass, when he seeth that the lad is not with us, that he will die, and thy servant shall bring down the gray hairs of thy servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, If I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. Now therefore I pray thee, let thy servants abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father, and the lad be not with me, lest peradventure I shall see evil that shall come on my father? So finally, Judah was willing to sacrifice himself. You know, Jesus said, No greater love hath any man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. And so Judah, the man who had committed incest with his daughter-in-law, who was, thought she was a prostitute and went in unto her, and he was a very ungodly man and stuff, Judah was literally willing to lay his life down and become a slave forever if Joseph would let the other brothers take Benjamin back to their father. And so they finally came to the end of themselves. All of these guys, they finally had to face their iniquity and recognize that they were getting what they deserved. And man, this is amazing. And so look at Joseph's reaction. It says, then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him. And he said, cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud. Now again, this doesn't show a bitter, angry person that is just punishing them and did all of this to get even. He wasn't taking any glory in this. He wept aloud. And the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, and they were troubled at his presence. Man, you know, this is such an understatement. The Bible does this often, like when God created the heavens and the earth, he looked and says, behold, it is good. Man, what an understatement. It was awesome. It was perfect. It was phenomenal. And yet the Bible just often understates things. I can imagine that when Joseph began to start, he was weeping and crying and beginning to tell his brothers, I'm Joseph that you sold into slavery. They were probably dumbfounded. They probably couldn't speak. They didn't know what happened. Their first thought was probably, how could this be? How could our brother that was 17 that we sold into slavery, how could he now be the Lord over all of Egypt? Then I'm sure that they probably thought, what is going to happen to us? They begin to start thinking, oh no, this is the reason that he was saying all of these things to us and accusing us of spies. There's no telling what was going through their mind, but I can guarantee you it was total fear. They recognized he had the power to kill them. They knew that they deserved whatever Joseph wanted to give them. But for the first time, they had truly humbled themselves. And look at what Joseph said unto them. It says in chapter 45, verse 4, and Joseph said unto his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. See, again, Joseph here isn't punishing them and telling them, you scum, you should have suffered. That's probably what many of us would have done. But instead, he's trying to comfort them because they were totally in terror. And he's comforting them and saying, don't be hard on yourself. God sent me before you to preserve life. Not only your life, but all of those lives here in Egypt. And then he goes on to say in verse 9, he says, haste ye, go up to my father and say unto them, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me and tarry not. And he said that they could dwell in the land of Goshen, which was the best part of the land. You know, and anyway, I'm running out of time. Today's going to be my last day to do this. But we can only imagine what it must have been like for Jacob when he finally heard that Joseph was still alive, and not only alive, but that he was the Lord over all of Egypt and in this exalted position. We also can only imagine what the brothers had to do. Man, you talk about eating crow. They had to come and confess to their father that they had tried to kill Joseph 22 years before this and had wound up selling him into slavery and had been lying to him for 22 years. And he had suffered for 22 years because of the brothers' hatred of Joseph. And they had kept this lie up. Man, I can't even imagine what strain this must have put on the family and all of the things that happened. And yet, Jacob was so blessed to find out that Joseph was still alive, and not only alive, but prospering, and had risen to probably the second most powerful man on the planet. That man, his joy in seeing Joseph must have overwhelmed some of his disappointment and anger towards his own children. Man, what a great story. This is just amazing. And so it says in verse 24, Genesis 45:24, so he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, see that ye fall not out by the way. These brothers had been evil men that had done terrible things, that had lied about him, that had said that he was dead. There wasn't a guarantee that they would ever come back. But apparently they had repented to such a degree that Joseph must have felt comfortable in sending them back. And this time he didn't keep any of the brothers in jail, as a guarantee that they had come back. And he had done what God had called him to do, and he left it up to God to make the rest come to pass. Now he did have the dream. The second dream that Joseph had in Genesis chapter 37 saw not only the brothers, but also the father and the mother coming and bowing down to him. And so I believe that he had an assurance from the Lord that not only would these brothers come and bow down to him, but that he would see his father again. So he probably was trusting the vision and the dreams that God had given him. And so it says in verse 25, and they went up out of Egypt and came unto the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father, and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all of the land. And it says that Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when they saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry them, the spirit of Jacob their father revived, and Israel said, it is enough. Joseph my son is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. And so, of course, the story goes on that they all moved down into there, counting Joseph and his 2 sons and his wife. There was a total of 70 people at this time that went into Egypt. And I really hadn't got time to go into detail on this, but over in the book of Genesis, or Galatians, it says that the law was 430 years after the time that God cut that covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. And in Genesis chapter 15, he says, your children will be servants in a strange land for 400 years. And so Galatians says it was 430 years after that covenant until the law was given through Moses on Mount Sinai. Many people think that the Jews spent 400 years in Egypt. And I haven't got time to go back through and do all of this, but if you add up the life of Jacob and then Joseph, and Joseph was he would have been 39 years at the time all of this happened. He lived to be 110 years old. And so all of that time, all of the descendants of Jacob were living in prosperity and blessed in the land of Goshen. The point that I'm getting at is that the children of Israel could have spent a maximum of 225 years under oppression in Egypt, not 400 years. And so anyway, that's important for you to recognize that their period of slavery and stuff, it probably was only 1 or 2 generations long, but they actually lived in Egypt for a long period of time. It says that when Joseph brought his father Jacob into Egypt, that Pharaoh came down and met him and actually let Jacob bless Pharaoh. This was quite a humbling act on Pharaoh's part. Pharaoh was an exceptional person, this Pharaoh, because he allowed a Hebrew, which, we read those scriptures where the Egyptians thought that the Hebrew were inferior. They wouldn't even eat with them. And he allowed a man who was despised by the Egyptians to take over the entire land of Egypt and begin to be governor and lord over it. And so this Pharaoh was an exceptional Pharaoh, not consistent with some of the things that we see by other pharaohs, and he even allowed Jacob to bless him. So Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years until he died, and then Joseph and his brothers took Jacob back and buried him in the burying place where Abraham and Sarah were buried. And when they came back, you can read this in the 50th chapter of the book of Genesis, the brothers thought that now that Jacob was dead, that surely Joseph is going to punish us. They were still living in guilt 17 years after they had moved into Egypt and after they had seen nothing but blessing. They had the best part of the land. Joseph had never mistreated them, but they were still afraid that now that Jacob was dead, that Joseph would vent and get even with them. And so they came and volunteered to become slaves to Joseph. And it grieved Joseph. It broke his heart that his brothers still hadn't received him. Boy, there's a lesson in this for us, that even though every one of us have transgressed against God and that we don't deserve any of the goodness, we deserve nothing but judgment. There are some Christians who have accepted salvation. They now don't believe that they're going to go to hell. They've accepted some of the grace of God, but they still feel like a second-class citizen. They still go around saying, I'm just an old sinner saved by grace. When the truth is, God wants us to live as sons. He's wanting us to live as the righteousness of God. And yet there's many Christians that are still, just like these brothers, thinking that, man, we just, need to be slaves. We don't deserve anything. And Joseph said that you're totally wrong in this, that there is no malice in his heart. He loved them. He wanted to bless them. And brothers and sisters, there's people watching this program that you have not fully understood and accepted the love that God has for us. If Joseph, a mere human being who had sinned himself, the Bible says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. If Joseph, an imperfect man, could operate in this degree of love and not hold his brothers accountable and somehow or another vent and punish them for the things that they had done, I can guarantee you whatever you have done, God has forgiven you through Jesus. And if you accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, I can guarantee you that there is no anger. All of His wrath was placed upon Jesus, and you are fully a son or a daughter of God, and He is wanting you to receive the full benefit of that. I want to thank you for watching our YouTube channel and the programs that we have available, and I want to encourage you that you can get the materials that we've offered. Also, I'd like to encourage you to like our program and subscribe to what we're doing. We have a lot of material, and I believe it'll be a real blessing to you. So thank you for being a part of it. God bless you.